Chapter 1. At 6 p.m., Sincere Clark finished making 6 dishes and 1 soup, all tailored to Victoria Bellweather's taste. At 7 p.m., Sincere Clark drew her bath, arranging the roses and aromatherapy oils Victoria loved beside the tub. At 8 p.m., Sincere Clark placed Victoria Bellweather's slippers neatly by the entrance. At 9 p.m., the front door opened, pushed by Victoria Bellweather. He stepped forward, took her coat, placed the slippers before her, hung the coat in the nearby closet, and then asked if she would like to bathe or eat first. Looking at her phone, she casually replied, "The bath first." The hour hand on the wall clock completed half a turn. Victoria Bellweather walked out of the bathroom, toweling her hair, still in her bathrobe. Sincere Clark immediately offered her pajamas. While she changed, he went to the kitchen to bring out the reheated dishes. Victoria Bellweather had long grown accustomed to everything he did. She was in a good mood today, engrossed in her phone screen, evidently chatting with someone. As he passed her while setting the table, he caught a glimpse of her illuminated phone screen. The label at the top, Julian, starkly caught his eye. He calmly averted his gaze, turned and went back to the kitchen. His phone suddenly rang in his pocket. Sincere Clark took out his phone. The screen displayed Mrs. Bellweather. The moment he answered, Mrs. Bellweather's voice came through from the other end. "Sincere, are you really going to divorce Victoria?" Sincere Clark looked out the window. Under the wall lamp, a cluster of epiphyllum flowers silently bloomed. After a long while, he softly replied, "Auntie Eleanor, you know I was only with her because of that contract. Now that the contract has expired and Julian is divorced and returned to the country, she's been very happy lately and no longer needs me." A long sigh came from Mrs. Bellweather on the other end, her words full of regret. "You've been wronged all these years. I know all the suffering you've endured. I thought your dedication over so many years would make her fall in love with you, but never mind. Anyway, Julian is back now, so I'm not worried about her anymore. 5 years ago you gave up the opportunity to study abroad for Victoria. If you still want to go now, I can arrange it for you." Sincere Clark looked at the fully bloomed epiphyllum cluster, his eyes lost for a moment. For the past 5 years for Victoria Bellweather, his life had been stagnant for far too long. It was time to move forward. So he nodded. "Thank you then. Please arrange it for me. I'd like to leave as soon as possible." After the call ended, the cluster of epiphyllum outside the window silently wilted, just as his 5-year marriage was about to end completely. He came from a poor background. It was the Bellweather Group's sponsorship that allowed him to continue his education, achieve academic success, and even secure the only study abroad exchange spot in the entire school. For this, before going abroad, he specifically came to the Bellweather family residence to express his gratitude. He wasn't the only one subsidized by the Bellweather Group, but he was the first to show his appreciation. This led Mrs. Bellweather, who had intended to quickly dismiss him with a few polite words, to look at him more closely. After hearing his purpose, she remained silent for some time before speaking. "If you really want to repay the favor, do me a favor." From Mrs. Bellweather, Sincere Clark learned about Victoria Bellweather and Julian Johnson's story. Victoria Bellweather was a socialite, the pride of her family. Julian Johnson was also the pride of his family. Both born into affluent households, they grew up together as childhood sweethearts. Everyone could see that Victoria Bellweather liked Julian Johnson. But because Julian once said he wanted a relationship that would develop slowly, like a gentle stream, he remained passively beside her. Finally, after graduating from university, when Victoria Bellweather felt the time was right and prepared to confess, Julian Johnson suddenly started dating someone else and went abroad with them. Unable to believe it, she chased him to the airport overnight but had a car accident halfway there. And just as she woke up after surgery, Julian Johnson had already had a flash marriage with that person abroad. From then on, she stayed home all day, drinking heavily. A proud socialite was tormented beyond recognition. It happened that Sincere Clark came calling at this time, so Mrs. Bellweather decided to use him to help her move past this relationship. Thus, to repay the favor, Sincere Clark gave up his opportunity to study abroad and signed a 5-year contract with Mrs. Bellweather. At one banquet, he deliberately, accidentally encountered Victoria Bellweather, pretended to fall in love at first sight, and began to pursue her relentlessly. From then on, the entire circle knew that Victoria Bellweather had a man beside her who loved her madly. Victoria Bellweather gradually grew accustomed to his kindness but never took the final step. Until that night, she and a few girlfriends made a bet on a yacht. Whoever's male companion could jump into the sea and find the ring they threw would get the piece of land in City North. Sincere Clark knew she hadn't slept for several nights, desperate to secure that land. When everyone else hesitated, afraid of the huge waves, he jumped into the sea without a second thought. That was the first time Victoria Bellweather lost her composure for him. She held on to him tightly after he was pulled out, her voice full of fear and trembling. "Sincere Clark, let's get married. I'll try to love you." But only later did Sincere Clark realize that her agreement to marry him that night was only because Julian Johnson had posted a social media update that day, showing a deep kiss under the aurora with his wife. Even so, to fulfill the contract and remove Julian Johnson from her heart, he tried his utmost to be good to Victoria Bellweather. He cooked for her, dutifully managing the household. When he learned that her childhood birthday wish was to see a meteor shower, but her parents had never taken her because they were busy with work, he specifically spent half a year searching for the best mountain peak to observe them from. But that night he waited all night, and Victoria Bellweather never appeared. Later he found out she had gone to look for Julian Johnson. At that time, Julian Johnson's marriage was already starting to have problems. From that day onward, she would go abroad once a week. Each time, she would prepare all sorts of novel and interesting gifts, deliver them to Julian Johnson's doorstep to please him but never let him know. The day Julian Johnson returned to the country to see him first, she sped in her car and had an accident. Sincere Clark stayed up all night guarding her for 3 days and 3 nights. Unconscious, she called out Julian Johnson's name 999 times from her sickbed. At that moment, Sincere Clark finally understood that the task Mrs. Bellweather had given him was something he could never accomplish. Fortunately, the contract was exactly at its term, and Julian Johnson had divorced and returned home. Victoria Bellweather got her wish and waited for the person she loved, and it was time for him to leave. From now on, both of them could start new lives. Chapter 2. Who are you talking to on the phone? Victoria Bellweather stood up and came into the kitchen to find Sincere Clark. Seeing he had been gone for a long time, she saw him standing there, staring blankly at his phone. He came back to his senses and said calmly, "No one." Late into the night, listening to Victoria Bellweather's shallow breathing beside him, Sincere Clark lay awake, staring at the ceiling, not sleeping a wink. The next morning, looking at the Western meal before her, Victoria Bellweather couldn't help but furrow her brows. "You know I don't like Western food. Why did you make this today?" He lowered his gaze, picked up a piece of steak with his fork, put it in his mouth, and chewed slowly. There was only this left in the fridge. Actually, there wasn't. He just wanted to prepare for studying abroad, so he was thinking of getting used to the taste beforehand. Fortunately, the woman opposite didn't think much of it. She placed her phone on the table, her gaze constantly fixed on it, seemingly waiting for someone's message. Without asking, he knew who she was waiting for. Suddenly, her phone vibrated, and she quickly picked it up. Julian Johnson had apparently sent something that made her very happy. Her usually indifferent lips curved slightly upwards. Sincere Clark watched her quietly for a moment before taking out the divorce agreement he had prepared long ago. From the moment he signed that contract, he had been preparing for this moment. Now he would finally be free. "Victoria Bellweather, let's get a divorce." He spoke calmly, his tone as flat as if discussing the weather. Victoria Bellweather was fully immersed in her chat with Julian Johnson, hardly heard what he said, and casually replied, "Okay." Sincere Clark wasn't surprised in the least because, over the past 5 years, she had always been like this towards him, distant and aloof. Now that Julian Johnson was back, she had withdrawn the last bit of attention she had given him. He turned the agreement to the last page, handed it to her along with a pen, and pointed to the signature line. "Sign here." "Okay." Busy chatting, she didn't even look. With one hand, she picked up the pen and signed her name where his finger was pointing, while her other hand continued typing on her phone. Sincere Clark put away the agreement and continued, "Victoria Bellweather, after the 1-month cooling-off period, I'll be leaving." Victoria Bellweather just nodded in response, then put down her knife and fork and stood up to leave. Watching her retreating figure, Sincere Clark finally couldn't help but call out to her. "Victoria Bellweather, do you know what I just said?" She paused, turned back, and looked at him in confusion. "Isn't it about donating supplies to the welfare home? Wasn't that contract you just asked me to sign for that? You mentioned it a few days ago. What about it?" He scoffed inwardly. He had already had her sign the supply contract last month. She really didn't care about him, and she really hadn't heard what he said, but it didn't matter anymore. "Just like this is fine. Victoria Bellweather, just like this. From now on, be well with Julian Johnson." So he smiled nothing. In the afternoon, Sincere Clark drove behind the supply truck to the welfare home. After finishing the work, he went to the matron's office to say goodbye. "Matron Agnes, I'm going abroad for further study." The matron was very happy for him. Sincere Clark was originally an outstanding student in the art department. She had regretted for a long time that he gave up studying abroad back then. "Sincere, that's wonderful." The matron held his hand, smiling brightly. But then, thinking of something else, a worried expression appeared on her face. "But if you go abroad for further study, won't you and Victoria be in different places? A long-distance relationship is very difficult." Sincere Clark looked at a few children playing and running in the distance and shook his head. "Not different places. Victoria and I are divorced." The matron froze for a moment, then let out a long sigh. "Indeed, I knew it back then. Your marriage wouldn't last long. If she truly loved you, why would she never have come back with you all these years? It's better this way." She affectionately patted the hand she held, softly comforting him. Sincere Clark smiled back and hugged the matron. Yes, it was truly good that they were divorced. Chapter 3. After returning from the welfare home, Sincere Clark went straight upstairs and entered the walk-in closet to pack his luggage. Only then did he realize how few clothes he owned. There were only the few sets Mrs. Bellweather had given him when they first got married. His wife of 5 years had never thought of buying him a single piece of clothing. After packing his clothes, Sincere Clark took all the gifts he had given Victoria Bellweather over the years and sold them as scrap metal. Over the years, to please her, he had meticulously prepared many birthday gifts for her, none of which she had ever looked at. These gifts were simply tossed to the side, covered in a thick layer of dust. Watching the scrap vehicle drive away, just as he was about to return to the mansion, a car horn blared behind him. He turned back to see a Maybach stopped in front of him. A woman in a red dress stepped out of the car. It was none other than Victoria's younger sister, Charlotte Bellweather. Charlotte Bellweather scoffed, watching the departing scrap vehicle. She turned and sized him up. As expected of someone from a humble background, even paper and cardboard have to be sold. Sincere Clark didn't even look at her. He turned and started to walk away. The mockery on Charlotte Bellweather's face disappeared suddenly. With a lunge, she tried to grab him. Since Sincere Clark had entered their Bellweather family, he had always been humble and eager to please them, never showing such a cold face towards her. Now that he dared to treat her this way, a surge of anger instantly swelled in Charlotte Bellweather's chest. "Are you deaf? Didn't you hear me talking to you?" Sincere Clark turned back, pulled her hand away, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his eyes. Charlotte Bellweather had always disliked him, believing that someone of his status was completely unworthy of entering the Bellweather family. So for 5 years after the marriage, she had constantly targeted him, either dumping his breakfast or trampling on the clothes he had washed. Now he was finally going to be free. He didn't want to continue humbly trying to please her. Charlotte Bellweather was about to continue her outburst, but then seemed to remember something. She looked at him mockingly. "It's good for someone like you to sell more cardboard. You probably don't know yet, but my sister's white moonlight is back. You, the man who usurped the magpie's nest, are finally going to get out." As soon as she finished speaking, a man in a white shirt walked out from behind her. This was Sincere Clark's first time seeing Julian Johnson. He had a pair of peach blossom eyes holding ripples of tenderness. His messy black hair fell casually. His skin was fair and porcelain-like. Coincidentally, he wore a simple white shirt with no other accessories, yet he exuded an inexplicable spiritual aura. The 5 years of a shattered marriage had left no mark on him. No wonder Victoria Bellweather couldn't forget him for so many years. Hearing this, Julian Johnson walked over and pulled Charlotte Bellweather's hand, his tone gentle. "Lottie, don't talk about Mr. Clark like that. He is your brother-in-law." "What brother-in-law?" "Brother Julian. I told you in the car. My sister has always liked you and has missed you all these years. She even went abroad once a week to find you. Those gifts were all bought by my sister for you. Don't you see how she feels about you?" After speaking, Charlotte Bellweather commanded the man before her, "Why are you standing there blankly? Hurry up and carry Brother Julian's luggage inside. My sister has agreed to have Brother Julian stay here." Sincere Clark glanced at the luggage, ignored them, and walked straight inside. Charlotte Bellweather was fuming behind him, stamping her feet. Finally, the driver carried the luggage inside. Charlotte Bellweather was about to angrily continue causing trouble when Victoria Bellweather walked in quickly from outside. Her gaze fell on Julian Johnson, who was sitting comfortably on the sofa. She looked relieved and spoke to Sincere Clark on the other side. "Julian's house hasn't been lived in for years and needs renovation, so he'll be staying with us for a few days." Sincere Clark said nothing. In the silence, Julian Johnson stood up meekly, his face full of unease. "Victoria, maybe I should leave. After all, this is your marital home, and Mr. Clark seems a little unhappy." Victoria Bellweather immediately reached out and stopped him. "It's not your fault." Then she looked at Sincere Clark again, her tone slightly heavy. "Didn't you say you weren't angry? What do you mean now?" Sincere Clark calmly raised his hand. There was a bandage on his index and index finger. "I'm injured. I can't touch water for a while." In reality, he wasn't injured at all. The contract had ended, and he didn't want to waste his energy on Victoria Bellweather anymore. So he deliberately put bandages on his fingers, using the injury as an excuse to refuse cooking. The atmosphere froze instantly. Sincere Clark had always handled all the household chores alone before, so the house staff at the mansion usually left when their shift ended. Now, besides him, there was no one else at home who could cook. Even if they were to call the staff back, it was too late. Charlotte Bellweather frowned unhappily, full of complaints. "Why didn't you say you were injured earlier? Are you deliberately trying to make us starve?" She was about to step forward and reproach him, but Julian Johnson quickly pulled her back. "Lottie, don't be like that." Julian Johnson looked at Victoria Bellweather next to him. "Sister Victoria, after being abroad for so long, I've really missed the hot pot place near the high school gate. I remember we often went there after evening study sessions. How about we have hot pot tonight?" Victoria Bellweather, of course, wouldn't refuse Julian Johnson's request. He said softly, "Okay, I'll take you." As they left, they coincidentally brought Sincere Clark along. Along the way, Victoria Bellweather chatted casually with the two people in the back seat while driving. Talking about their high school days, Julian Johnson became increasingly cheerful, and Charlotte Bellweather occasionally chimed in. At the height of their laughter, all three couldn't help but burst out laughing. Midway through the laughter, Julian Johnson suddenly seemed to remember something. He looked at Sincere Clark in the passenger seat and smiled. "Mr. Clark, I'm sorry. We're not deliberately ignoring you, it's just that you weren't a part of those memories." Not only was he not a part of those memories, but he wouldn't be a part of their future days either. Sincere Clark simply nodded and quietly closed his eyes. Victoria Bellweather rarely glanced at him and somehow felt that he seemed a little different. After parking the car, Sincere Clark excused himself to go to the restroom first. He filled his hands with cold water and splashed it on his face. He looked up at himself in the mirror. His features were delicate and his skin was fair, but they couldn't hide the weariness between his brows. After 5 years of marriage, Julian Johnson's eyes were full of vitality, while his own showed only exhaustion. Just hold on a little longer, and he'll be completely free. He told himself this. Returning to the private room, the three of them had already ordered their food. The soup base should be clear. Julian doesn't eat meat, put more vegetables, excluding cilantro. Victoria Bellweather watched the menu, giving instructions to the waiter beside them. Even after so many years, she still remembered Julian Johnson's preferences so clearly. Sincere, do you have any dietary restrictions? 5 years. This was the first time she had asked about his preferences. Sincere Clark sat on the other side, grabbed a tissue and wiped his bowl and chopsticks. Anything is fine, except seafood. During this hot pot meal, Victoria Bellweather only focused on Julian Johnson next to her. She didn't eat much herself, but kept putting food into his bowl. Halfway through the meal, a dispute suddenly erupted at the table next door. It became increasingly heated, even escalating to physical violence. The customers nearby rushed forward, trying to intervene. However, unexpectedly, one person with a short temper suddenly grabbed the pot of boiling hot pot soup and threw it towards the other person. That person quickly dodged. Due to the displacement, the hot pot just happened to be splashed towards their table. Amidst the screams, Victoria Bellweather instinctively turned and shielded Julian Johnson in her arms. Sincere Clark couldn't dodge in time and watched helplessly as a large pot of boiling hot pot broth was splashed all over him. Chapter 5. Instantly, Sincere Clark was covered in hot pot broth. His fair arms turned red and blistered in an instant. The searing pain was like thousands of tiny needles piercing his entire body, making him unable to utter a word. Sincere Victoria Bellweather quickly let go of Julian Johnson and rushed towards him, a look of panic appearing in her eyes for the first time. "Does it hurt? I'll take you to the hospital." He looked up at her, pain spreading throughout his body, unable to say a word no matter how hard he tried. "Oh my God, brother Julian, how did you get hurt so badly?" Upon hearing this, Victoria Bellweather's attention immediately shifted to Julian Johnson. She became more frantic and rushed towards him. His fair arm had a few drops of hot pot oil on it, which indeed looked especially dramatic. Julian Johnson pulled his arm back, shaking his head with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm okay. Mr. Clark looks more serious. You should take him to the hospital first." "What do you mean, not serious? You've been pampered since childhood. Even a little scratch makes you hurt for a day. Sister, what are you standing blankly for? Hurry and take brother Julian to the hospital." Charlotte Bellweather stamped her foot in exasperation, not forgetting to reach out and warn the group of people. "Are you people mad? If you want to argue, go outside. You hurt brother Julian. My sister won't let you off at this point." Julian Johnson could no longer bear the pain and cried out softly but still insisted, "It's okay, Sister Victoria. You should still go see Mr. Clark. He's much more seriously injured." His appearance undoubtedly pained her heart. She no longer cared about the disheveled Sincere Clark, picked up Julian Johnson by the waist, and hurried out. Before leaving, she seemed to remember something and looked at Sincere Clark with a guilty expression. "Julian's skin has been sensitive since he was a child, and he's afraid of pain. The hospital isn't far from here. You can take a taxi yourself." It wasn't until the backs of the three of them disappeared from his sight that Sincere Clark came back to himself, enduring the pain while gasping for cool air. Seeing how severely he was injured and left behind, a sympathetic waiter quickly walked over, apologizing to him while providing emergency treatment for his wounds. After taking pain Medicat Ion, the pain in his body finally eased a bit. At least he wasn't in too much pain to speak a word anymore. He borrowed a set of clothes from the waiter and changed into them. Then, trembling, he walked out to hail a taxi and head to the hospital. The doctor, holding a cotton swab, pressed down on the blistered areas while instructing him to apply medication daily so there wouldn't be scars. Sincere Clark squeezed his eyes shut in pain. 2 nurses pushed a cart past him nearby. If you ask me, Miss Bellweather is really too good to Mr. Johnson. He just got a few drops of hot pot oil on him, and she booked the entire floor and called in all the dermatology experts. Exactly. His injury is so minor it would almost heal on its own if he came a bit later. I wish I also had a caring woman who liked me like that. Haha, don't even think about it. A woman like that is 1 in a million. 1 in a million? Sincere Clark smiled, leaving behind his severely injured spouse to go take care of someone with a minor injury. Yes, he was indeed 1 in a million. Only after his wounds were bandaged did he thank the doctor and stand up to leave. Just as he walked out the hospital entrance, his phone buzzed with a message. He clicked on it to see an acceptance letter from the university he applied to abroad, reminding him to prepare an entrance portfolio upon checking in. After 5 years, Sincere Clark picked up a paintbrush again. After buying paintbrushes and pigments, Sincere Clark didn't go back to the Bellweather family residence. Instead, he went to Lunar Lake Mountain. The scenery at Lunar Lake Mountain was beautiful. A tranquil lake lay nestled among the mountains, its surface as calm as a mirror, reflecting the surrounding peaks like a natural painting. It was refreshing and uplifting. He let out a long sigh. 5 years of suppression instantly vanished, leaving only long-lost freedom. Inspiration flowed. The paintbrush touched the pristine paper. In the blink of an eye, a beautiful scene quietly emerged on the page. There was no noise, no dust. Only the mountain birds singing and the gentle sound of the wind. For 3 whole days he was immersed in this beautiful scenery. It wasn't until coming down the mountain to mail the painting to the school that Sincere Clark turned on his phone. The moment it powered on, countless missed calls and messages flooded the screen, all from Victoria Bellweather. This had never happened before. Previously, he was the only one who called and messaged her. She never called him, and even missed calls weren't returned. As he stood blankly, Charlotte Bellweather's call came in. As soon as he answered, her sharp voice came from the other end. "Sincere Clark, where have you been all these days? Do you know my sister has been looking for you like crazy? Don't think this will get my sister's attention. You're dreaming the place of master in the Bellweather family can only belong to brother Julian." After yelling, Charlotte Bellweather hung up. Only Sincere Clark frowned slightly. Had he heard wrong? Victoria Bellweather was looking for him like crazy? What for? He intended to ask Charlotte Bellweather if she had made a mistake, but the 108 missed calls on his phone indeed showed how urgent Victoria Bellweather was to find him. Chapter 6. Holding on to this confusion, he carried his painting board back home. As soon as he got out of the car, the mansion staff came running out, their faces full of relief at his return. A few were almost crying. Sir, you're finally back. These past few days you haven't been home. Everything has been a mess. Miss Bellweather hasn't been satisfied with anything we've done. She's been short-tempered for days." Hearing this, Sincere Clark understood. It turned out she was unaccustomed to being without his care. But she should get used to it because soon he would be leaving completely. For the rest of her life she would live without him. Sincere Clark reassured the staff and then stepped into the mansion. The lights weren't even on inside. Victoria Bellweather sat alone on the sofa. The moonlight streaming through the window flickered, slicing her handsome outline into light and shadow, making it difficult to make out. Hearing footsteps, the woman finally raised her head and stared at him intently for a long time, a hint of displeasure suppressed in her voice. "Where have you been these few days?" he calmly replied as he took off his trench coat. "I went to the mountains for sketching." The woman frowned. "Why are you suddenly interested in painting?" It wasn't sudden. He was already an outstanding student in the art department. If it hadn't been for repaying the favor, he would have long since studied abroad and become an excellent painter. But he didn't tell Victoria Bellweather this. He simply picked up a glass of water, took a sip, and spoke casually. Suddenly felt like painting. Seeing this, Victoria Bellweather pressed her temples. About the hot pot incident last time, I didn't mean to leave you. It's just that Julian has been pampered since childhood and is afraid of pain. Even a slight scratch makes him hurt for a day. I grew up with him and am used to taking care of him, which is why I took him to the hospital first. And you didn't object at the time, did you? Why are you throwing tantrums and leaving home again? Julian's house has also been renovated, and he's moved out of our place. From now on, don't have a temperamental fit over such small things. Towards the end, there was a hint of accusation in her tone. He wasn't sure if she was accusing Sincere Clark of leaving home or accusing him of being narrow-minded, causing her beloved Julian Johnson to move out of their house early. But Sincere Clark didn't care anymore. He casually acknowledged her words, put down his glass, and prepared to go upstairs. Sincere Clark, he looked back and saw the woman on the sofa had stood up. "I'm hungry. Make me a bowl of noodles." Sincere Clark raised his bandaged left hand again. "Did you forget? My hand is also injured." Victoria Bellweather froze slightly. But Sincere Clark didn't pay attention to her reaction. He turned and headed upstairs. Another day, as he came out of his room, a set of expensive jewelry was handed to him. He looked up at Victoria Bellweather before him, confused. Victoria Bellweather cleared her throat. "About the hot pot incident last time, I was busy taking care of Julian at the time and didn't get to focus on you. This is compensation." Sincere Clark looked at the emerald pinky ring in the box, a flicker of complexity in his eyes. 5 years. A whole 5 years. This was her first time giving him a gift, but it was for compensation. Compensation because she was busy taking care of her white moonlight and neglected him. He suddenly remembered the pile of meticulously prepared gifts for Julian Johnson in his study. A surge of mockery rose in his heart, but he instantly suppressed it. Gifts he had never dared to hope for before, he didn't need now. Seeing that he hadn't taken it after a pause, she didn't think much of it. She just assumed he didn't like it. "I've been busy with Julian's matters lately, so I had my assistant pick the most expensive one at an auction. If you don't like it, then—" Victoria Bellweather's words were cut off by Charlotte Bellweather's voice from the doorway. "Brother Julian, I told you, my sister likes you so much you shouldn't have moved out. Even if you moved out, you should still come and visit my sister often." As she spoke, she pulled Julian Johnson in. Seeing the ring on his hand, she cried out in surprise, "Oh my God, sister, brother. Julian just told me he really likes this kind of pinky ring. I can't believe you bought it." She then looked at Julian Johnson beside her, her eyes full of envy. Hearing this, Julian Johnson's face instantly turned red, and he lowered his head shyly. Seeing the hesitation in Victoria Bellweather's eyes, Sincere Clark didn't think twice. He took the jewelry box from her hand and handed it to Julian Johnson. "Since it was bought for you, just accept it." With one sentence, he made a choice for Victoria Bellweather, resolving her dilemma. This was the first time Victoria Bellweather's gaze wasn't fixed on Julian Johnson. Instead, she couldn't help but look at Sincere Clark. For some reason, seeing his generous demeanor, Victoria Bellweather felt uncomfortable for the first time. She just felt that he was different from before, but exactly how he was different she couldn't explain. Chapter 7. A week later was the end of the divorce cooling-off period. Sincere Clark could finally leave. He began to pack his luggage. Halfway through packing, Victoria Bellweather sent her assistant with a high-end evening gown, asking him to attend a banquet at the old family residence. Looking at the gown, Sincere Clark was suddenly amused. Legally, their marital relationship had ended, but Victoria Bellweather seemed completely unaware, still asking him to attend as her husband. Sincere Clark initially wanted to refuse, but thinking of Mrs. Bellweather's care over the years and realizing he needed to get some documents for his study abroad from her, he decided to change into the gown and attend the banquet. In the bustling and lively banquet hall, the lights were brilliant, glasses clinked, and the aroma of wine overflowed from colliding glasses, spreading through the noisy crowd. In the center of the crowd, Julian Johnson was surrounded by a group of friends. "Julian, Ms. Bellweather truly loves you so much."
"Yes, that ring on your hand was just bought at a Sotheby's auction."
"It's a global limited edition, symbolizing unique love in the world. We heard before that a mysterious wealthy person paid a fortune for it, and we didn't expect it to be Miss Bellweather. Who would have thought that after all these years Miss Bellweather still can't forget you? I remember back in school she accompanied you to and from school every day. Those jellies and chocolates in your desk drawers were all put there secretly by Miss Bellweather. I remember one time you argued and you didn't talk to her for days, and she went to great lengths to try and make up with you, asking countless people for advice. One time she even came to me. Tisk, tisk. You don't know what she was like then. Her eyes were bloodshot. You ignoring her for a few days was like killing her. Julian, probably no one in this world loves you more than Miss Bellweather. When she learned you had a flash marriage with someone else, she was devastated. Later, when she heard you weren't happy abroad, she flew over every week to secretly look at you, buying you gifts to make you happy. Now you're also divorced, and I don't think she likes her current husband that much. You two should just get together, right, get together. Amidst the chorus of shouts, Sincere Clark stood in a corner, quietly watching the scene, listening to others cheering and recounting how much his wife used to love someone else. "Sincere." A voice suddenly sounded from behind, pulling his thoughts back. He turned to look at the person. He wanted to call her mom, but suddenly remembered something and changed his address, respectfully calling her Auntie Eleanor. Hearing that address, Mrs. Bellweather sighed but said nothing, only handing him all the necessary documents for going abroad. "Sincere, I've arranged everything you need for studying abroad. Classes there start early, so I've also booked your flight. It departs in 3 hours.
Is there anything else you need me to help you with?"
Sincere Clark looked at the documents in his hand, feeling greatly relieved. Thinking of the long-lost freedom and a new life that awaited him, his hands trembled involuntarily. Sincere Clark took a deep breath to suppress his excitement, placed the documents in his bag, and shook his head. "Thank you very much, Auntie Eleanor. I'm already grateful for everything you've done for me." He paused then, as if remembering something, he said softly, "I only have one small request. If Victoria Bellweather ever finds out everything and asks about my whereabouts, please promise me you won't say a word. He and Victoria Bellweather, it's better they never see each other again in this life." Hearing this, Mrs. Bellweather looked at him with surprise. "Didn't you tell her you were leaving?" "Tell her what?" "Tell her that he deliberately approached her back then? Or tell her that his fervent kindness towards her for the past 5 years wasn't out of love, but merely to repay a debt, following Mrs. Bellweather's orders, hoping to make her forget Julian Johnson and move on from that failed relationship? Or tell her that he was divorcing her, going abroad and never returning? What would be the point? Her white moonlight was back. Even if he left, he probably would be indifferent anyway. Sincere Clark smiled. "There's no need. I just want to leave as soon as possible and avoid any further complications." "Leaving what?" A woman's voice suddenly came from behind them. Sincere Clark turned around and met Victoria Bellweather's deep eyes. His heart trembled slightly. He opened his mouth wanting to explain something, but he wasn't sure if she had heard him or how much she had heard. Luckily, Mrs. Bellweather quickly smoothed things over. "Nothing. Why did you come over?" Victoria Bellweather didn't ask further. She just glanced at the cake on the stage. "Mom, it's time for you to go cut the cake." Mrs. Bellweather rubbed her head, refusing. "I'm not feeling well." Go cut the cake instead." After saying this, she no longer looked at them and had the staff help her upstairs. After seeing Mrs. Bellweather upstairs, Victoria Bellweather extended her hand to Sincere Clark. "Let's go cut the cake." But he shook his head, raising his injured hand. "No, my injury hasn't healed yet. Ask Julian Johnson." A trace of surprise flashed in the woman's eyes. She seemed not to understand why he would say that. She felt as if something was slipping out of her control. Why should I ask him? This time, it was Sincere Clark who was confused. Why? Didn't she always leave him behind to go looking for Julian Johnson? For the past 5 years she had gone abroad for Julian Johnson countless times. Now that he was actively giving her the opportunity, what was with this expression of disbelief? He smiled slightly. Because you two are close. It's just cutting a cake, there's nothing to it. Seeing his smiling face, which indeed didn't look angry, she still felt it was odd, but said nothing more. She walked straight to Julian Johnson and leaned in, whispered a few words in his ear. Julian Johnson's face turned red, but he still nodded, hooked her arm, and went onto the stage. Together, they held hands and cut the cake. Amidst the melodious piano music, their intimate embrace didn't look like cutting a birthday cake. It looked more like cutting a wedding cake. Halfway through the banquet, some older attendees left early due to health reasons, leaving only the younger generation. These younger guests grew up with Victoria Bellweather and Julian Johnson and were well aware of their history. Seeing them like this now, applause immediately erupted. Some onlookers even clapped and cheered. A kiss, a kiss, a kiss! This made Julian Johnson's face turn even redder. Victoria Bellweather's earlobes also turned slightly red. She didn't kiss Julian Johnson, but she didn't stop the group from cheering either. Sincere Clark didn't care. He took out his phone and quietly calculated the time he needed to leave. If his flight departed in 3 hours, he needed to leave now. But his quiet, silent demeanor was seen by everyone as sadness. Chapter 8. Soon a group of socialites and young masters, led by Charlotte Bellweather, walked over with sneers. When Sincere Clark looked up again, he was already surrounded by a crowd. Charlotte Bellweather looked at him with a smirk. Sincere Clark, what does it matter if you've been married to my sister for so many years? You can still only stand here forlornly and watch my sister and brother Julian show their affection. I told you already, my sister likes brother Julian. Being with you was just to heal from her failed relationship. If you knew what was good for you, you would have left a long time ago. How can you shamelessly cling to my sister and refuse to let go? Sincere Clark was in a hurry to go back and pack. He ignored these people and turned to leave. Who knew this group would become even more aggressive? An ugly duckling still dreaming of turning into a swan. What dreams are you having if Julian hadn't gone abroad? Do you think someone like you could have taken the position of Bellweather's son-in-law? Don't you know your own worth? I advise you, if you know what's good for you, just obediently step aside and get out of the Bellweather family. They pushed and shoved him as they spoke. Are you mute? We're talking to you. Didn't you hear? Seeing that Sincere Clark remained silent, one of the hot-tempered people finally couldn't stand it anymore and suddenly pushed him backward. Bang! A loud crash echoed. Sincere Clark was thrown forcefully onto the towering champagne tower behind him. The glasses shattered into pieces, the white wine mixed with red blood, creating a gruesome sight. Immediately, the eyes of everyone present shifted towards him. On the stage, Victoria Bellweather's pupils contracted upon seeing this scene. She quickly released Julian Johnson's hand and hurried over. Looking at Sincere Clark lying on the ground covered in blood, her eyes were filled with anger. She quickly knelt down and helped him up. While telling someone to call the private doctor, she looked up at the people around her with a cold voice. Who did this? Everyone was too scared to speak. Her face was extremely grim. Just as she was about to speak again, a bodyguard suddenly ran over. Miss Bellweather, Mr. Johnson suddenly said his stomach hurts very badly. Please go check on him quickly. Victoria Bellweather didn't release Sincere Clark, but simply frowned slightly. Is it very serious? The bodyguard's eyes were anxious. Mr. Johnson is in so much pain he's rolling around. This time the person who hesitated was Victoria Bellweather. She looked at Sincere Clark, a hint of hesitation flashing across her face. Sincere Clark understood what she was about to say. He struggled to sit up from her arms, his expression calm. Yes, I know. He's been pampered since he was a child, and even a slight injury will cause him discomfort for a day. And you're used to taking care of him. Unexpectedly, Sincere Clark had anticipated her words. Her thin lips moved, but she couldn't utter a single sound. Sincere Clark, however, had already staggered to his feet and continued, "It's all right, go be with him. The doctor should go see him first too. I can handle myself." For some unknown reason, seeing his indifferent demeanor made her feel a strange panic. He had always been so generous before, but today he was so severely injured, yet he was excessively generous. So generous that his eyes no longer held any trace of her. This wasn't like him. Previously his eyes were full of her. Since when had he become this way? Victoria Bellweather was about to continue speaking, but a sudden cry of pain from Julian Johnson echoed from not far away. Finally, she no longer hesitated. She just looked guiltily at Sincere Clark. "Sincere, I'll come to see you later. I'll compensate you afterwards." After saying this, she didn't hesitate further. She abandoned him and hurried away. Watching her rush off, anxiously helping Julian Johnson and softly comforting him, Sincere Clark curled his lips into a mocking smile. But this scene, in the eyes of Charlotte Bellweather and a few others, became proof of his heartbreak at being abandoned. I thought this would make my sister feel a little pity for you. But she still ditched you. Sincere Clark, if you have any self-awareness, just leave the Bellweather family on your own." Sincere Clark ignored these people. He borrowed an empty room from the staff, applied medication himself, changed into a fresh set of clothes, and then limped away. Back at the mansion, Sincere Clark went straight upstairs to pack his luggage. Carrying his luggage downstairs, Sincere Clark placed the divorce agreement, signed by both of them, on the table. Just as he opened the door to leave, he met eyes with someone about to enter. Seeing Sincere Clark, Charlotte Bellweather mumbled a string of complaints with her head down. "Why were you running around? My sister told me to bring you medicine. I really don't know what she's thinking. Not staying by brother Julian's side and still worrying about you. She insisted I come over, making me search for you for ages. I don't need it. You should save it for Julian Johnson." Sincere Clark's face was calm. After speaking, he pushed Charlotte Bellweather's hand away and prepared to leave. It was at this moment that Charlotte Bellweather saw the suitcase in his hand. Her expression changed dramatically. She grabbed Sincere Clark's hand. "What are you doing?" Sincere Clark looked at her, his eyes devoid of any emotion. "I'm holding my luggage. What do you think I'm doing? It's obvious I'm leaving. Your sister likes Julian Johnson, and you've always clamored for Julian Johnson to be your brother-in-law. Now I'm voluntarily divorcing and stepping aside for him." Charlotte Bellweather's eyes widened upon hearing these words. She stood blankly, as if unable to believe what she had heard. After all, everyone in the circle knew how much Sincere Clark loved Victoria Bellweather before. How could he just leave now? She seemed to understand something. Even her voice trembled slightly. "Sincere Clark, stop pretending. You love my sister so much. You were so persistent back then, clinging to her without shame just to marry her. How could you possibly propose divorce yourself now? I understand. You're playing hard to get, aren't you? Let me tell you, that trick won't work on my sister." Sincere Clark's eyes were calm. "Whether it's true or not, the divorce agreement is on the table. You can go see for yourself. Charlotte Bellweather, you've been holding my hand. Are you perhaps reluctant to see me leave?" Hearing this, Charlotte Bellweather bristled instantly and quickly released Sincere Clark's hand. "How could that be? I can't wait for you to leave immediately. When you're gone, I'll immediately set off fireworks to celebrate my sister. Would probably be so happy if she knew you left on your own accord for some reason." She said that last sentence with remarkably little conviction. Sincere Clark didn't look at her again. He said, "Then congratulations to both of you for getting what you wanted," and walked out the door. Watching his figure leave without a trace of linger, Charlotte Bellweather felt for the first time that something was completely out of control. A wave of panic surged within her, and she hurriedly called out to him, "Sincere Clark, where are you going? Aren't you even going to say goodbye to my sister?" Sincere Clark's hand on the suitcase handle paused slightly. He turned to look at Charlotte Bellweather and at the mansion behind her. To repay a debt, he pretended to love Victoria Bellweather for 5 years, becoming the man they called someone who clung to Victoria Bellweather without shame. To repay a debt, he abandoned his dreams, sacrificed his future, and lost himself. For 5 years, he diligently tried to be a good husband, managing the household with dedication, yet he received not a shred of respect, not a hint of self. He endured such a stifling life for the entire 5 years. Finally, he had repaid his debt. Finally, he welcomed freedom. Sincere Clark smiled for the first time, a smile so genuine, so unrestrained. Me? I'm going to live a life that belongs only to Sincere Clark. From this moment on, none of this here would concern him anymore. Goodbye, Bellweather family. Goodbye, Victoria Bellweather. With a wave like a weight lifted, he walked into the moonlight, suitcase in hand, and vanished into the vast night. Chapter 9. 3 days later, Victoria Bellweather found time to come back to get some clothes to change into. As soon as she entered, she habitually called out Sincere Clark's name, but after calling several times, only a few staff members came. "Where's the mister?" Seeing the staff awkwardly change her shoes and take her coat, her brows furrowed, the staff members stammered for a long moment before saying, "The mister isn't at home." She put on her slippers and walked inside. Not at home again. Last time, after accompanying Julian Johnson to the hospital when his hand was scalded by the hot pot, Sincere Clark had been like this too, silently going sketching for several days. This time too, she had first helped Julian Johnson to the hospital, and he had even generously told her she could go to the hospital herself before she left. Now he was throwing a tantrum and leaving home again. The frustration in her heart gradually turned into an ineffable anger. Victoria Bellweather had just reached the sofa when her eyes fell upon the document on the table. Ordinarily, she wouldn't have even glanced at it. But today, on a whim, she picked up the document from the table. The large characters divorce agreement immediately entered her vision. And at the bottom, in the signatory space for the mail, her name conspicuously appeared in an instant. Her face turned incredibly cold. The light in her eyes vanished, replaced by an endless, chilling darkness. She reached out and touched her signature, realizing it wasn't printed or forged, but truly her own handwriting. But she had no memory of ever signing a divorce agreement suddenly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She suddenly recalled the morning they ate Western food, when he seemed to have handed her something to sign. She had been busy chatting with Julian Johnson at the time and hadn't paid attention. Thinking back now, that must have been the divorce agreement. The document crumpled in her hands. Then she tore it into pieces, sending them scattering. Sincere Clark divorcing her? This was undoubtedly the biggest joke in the world. He loved her so much, loved her enough to jump into the sea for her. She had abandoned him so many times, and she had never seen him get angry. She figured it was just that he was a little jealous because she had been busy taking care of Julian Johnson lately. 5 years was long enough for him to feel a little jealous. Anyway, he would come back on his own eventually. If he didn't come back, no, he would come back. Victoria Bellweather was so certain because in this world, aside from Sincere Clark, no one else loved her enough to risk their life. Over the next few days, the staff at the mansion tacitly avoided mentioning Sincere Clark, until this day, when Victoria Bellweather brought Julian Johnson home from the hospital. Looking at the bland porridge before her, Charlotte Bellweather threw down her spoon and protested loudly. "Who made this porridge? Where's Sincere Clark? Tell him to make us another bowl." The staff member beside her hesitated before speaking. "Miss Charlotte, the mister hasn't been back these past few days, so—" Charlotte Bellweather's eyes widened instantly. Sincere Clark hadn't been back? She had always thought Sincere Clark was just joking when he talked about divorce. After all, their family was the only affluent family Sincere Clark could ever hope to latch onto in his life. Any sensible person would cling to it tightly. Remembering the divorce agreement she had seen on the table that day, she looked up at Victoria Bellweather opposite her. She had heard the staff say that Victoria Bellweather had also seen the divorce agreement when she returned, but she hadn't taken it seriously, tearing it up and throwing it in the trash. She bit her lip and looked over at Anyi beside her. Anyi was quietly drinking porridge, appearing not to have heard anything they were saying. She bit her lip and glanced at Julian Johnson beside her. He was quietly eating his porridge, seeming not to have heard anything they were saying. Her older sister had longed for an Yi for so many years. Now, brother and Yi also seems to be coming back, and Shu Yunshin has divorced and stepped aside. Logically, her older sister should be happy. Her sister had longed for Julian Johnson for so many years. Now brother Julian seemed to be coming around, and Sincere Clark had divorced and withdrawn. By all accounts, her sister should be happy. Pei Yao looked back at Pei Qinghuan, her eyebrows slightly furrowed, seeming dissatisfied that Shu Yunshin had not returned for a long time. Charlotte Bellweather looked back at Victoria Bellweather. Her brow was slightly furrowed. She seemed unhappy that Sincere Clark hadn't returned after so long. Thinking of Shu Yunshin, resentment grew in her heart. Thinking of Sincere Clark, she felt another layer of resentment. They simply left, yet they still left her sister uneasy. He's left, fine. But why did he have to leave her sister so unsettled? After dinner, Yi was helped upstairs by a servant to rest. After the meal, Julian Johnson was helped upstairs by the staff to rest. Pei Yao looked at Pei Qinghuan, who was still sitting in her original seat, thought for a moment and said. Charlotte Bellweather looked at Victoria Bellweather, still seated in her place, thought for a moment and spoke. Sister, when are you going to make things official within YGD? I've been looking forward to him being my brother-in-law for many years. I've been hoping for him to be my brother-in-law for years. Chapter 10. Victoria Bellweather abruptly looked up at her. What did you say? Charlotte Bellweather had always been a little afraid of this sister. She couldn't help but flinch back, but still insisted stubbornly. Sincere Clark has already divorced you and you don't like him. Why don't you get together with brother Julian? How do you know I divorced Sincere Clark? She swallowed hard and said, Didn't you ask me to take medicine to Sincere Clark last time? She happened to see the divorce agreement then, but at the time she thought Sincere Clark was just talking. Seeing that Sincere Clark hadn't returned for so long, she had no choice but to believe that Sincere Clark was serious about getting a divorce. Hearing her words, Victoria Bellweather's face grew even gloomier. She knew without a doubt that the divorce agreement Sincere Clark had left behind wasn't a tantrum. He genuinely wanted to divorce her. The coffee cup in her hand was slammed onto the table. Sincere Clark loved her so much, yet he still divorced her. She had pampered him too much over the years. Besides, where could he possibly go after leaving her? Call the mister and tell him not to throw a tantrum and come back quickly. The staff member opened her mouth, looking troubled. We called the mister before, but the call wouldn't go through. Victoria Bellweather took out her phone and opened her contacts. She scrolled up and down and only then realized she didn't have his number saved at all. The last time her assistant had made the call for him. After getting Sincere Clark's number from the staff, she dialed it on her phone, but only a robotic female voice answered from the other end. The number you have dialed is not in service. Sincere Clark had actually deactivated his number. The woman looked at the blank screen, the anger in her eyes deepening. She stood up abruptly and walked out. Charlotte Bellweather, who was shouting behind her, couldn't stop her. It wasn't until she was in the car, waiting at a red light, that Victoria Bellweather calmed down. Where was she going to find Sincere Clark? Sincere Clark had lost his parents from a young age. When he was sponsored by the Bellweather family, he had always lived in the welfare home. Amidst the honking from the car behind her, she made a U-turn and drove towards the welfare home. Looking at the tall man before her, the matron's face turned cold for the first time. She first asked the other teachers to take the children away, then sat down on a chair. Miss Bellweather, please sit down. What can I do for you? Victoria Bellweather didn't want to dwell on the other party's distant attitude. She just looked at her. I wanted to ask, matron, if you know where Sincere Clark went. She originally wanted to say that their home had been in disarray since he left these past few days, but remembering the status of the person before her, she ultimately bit back the rest of her sentence. A hint of mockery flashed in the matron's eyes. Married for 5 years, this is how Victoria Bellweather referred to Sincere? A pang of heartache flashed in her heart, which then turned into relief. relief that Sincere Clark had repaid his debt early and divorced her. Otherwise, a woman like this truly wasn't worth spending a lifetime with. The matron didn't even look at Victoria Bellweather and began to attend to her own matters. You were married to Sincere for 5 years and don't know where he went. How would I know? Miss Bellweather, please leave. Returning empty-handed, Victoria Bellweather slammed her fist on the steering wheel. Sincere Clark. She had always thought that the divorce agreement Sincere Clark left behind was just him throwing a tantrum, but now he had deactivated his phone number, and no one knew where he had gone. She had no choice but to admit that he was serious about wanting to divorce her. But her heart was full of unwillingness. Sincere Clark had loved her so much before. Why did he choose to leave her so decisively? Just then, her phone rang beside her. After answering, Mrs. Bellweather's weak voice came from the other end.
Victoria, come back.
Mom has something to tell you. Mrs. Bellweather looked at the person before her and sighed. Now that you've divorced Sincere, and Julian has divorced and returned, you and Julian, Mom. Victoria Bellweather quickly interrupted Mrs. Bellweather. I didn't agree to divorce Sincere. Mrs. Bellweather's eyes widened in surprise. She took a divorce certificate from the drawer. But you've already gotten the divorce certificate, haven't you? Didn't Sincere tell you? Chapter 11. Seeing the fleeting bewilderment in her eyes, Mrs. Bellweather was even more surprised. She had thought Sincere Clark simply hadn't told her daughter about going abroad, but she hadn't expected he hadn't even mentioned the divorce. So how had they signed the divorce agreement? Victoria Bellweather looked at the divorce certificate before her, her eyes darkening. The fiery anger burning in her chest had ignited in her eyes. She had only thought Sincere Clark had merely signed the divorce agreement with her. She hadn't expected he had even obtained the divorce certificate if she remembered correctly. Getting the divorce certificate required a 1-month cooling-off period. This meant that Sincere Clark had been preparing to divorce her over a month ago. Seeing Mrs. Bellweather's questioning gaze, she spoke a few words dismissively. Then she asked Mrs. Bellweather why she wanted to set her up with Julian Johnson again. Mrs. Bellweather smiled. Back then, you were heartbroken over Julian, wanting to die. Now Julian is back and Sincere has divorced you, so I just thought... Everyone had said she and Julian Johnson weren't a good match before, but now that both were divorced, everyone started saying they were well suited again. A discomfort spread from within her heart. But I didn't agree to divorce Sincere. For some reason, hearing the words divorce Sincere Clark made her heart suddenly panic. After 5 years of marriage, she had long grown accustomed to Sincere Clark's care. If she divorced him, she couldn't imagine how miserable her life would be. Furthermore, Sincere Clark loved her deeply. His divorce must be him throwing a tantrum. As for Julian Johnson, she did like him. After all, he was her white moonlight from adolescence, someone she had pined for so many years. But to ask herself to give up Sincere Clark, she felt like she couldn't do it. Looking at the hesitation in Victoria Bellweather's eyes, Mrs. Bellweather took out another document from the drawer. When Victoria Bellweather saw the large characters repayment agreement and Sincere Clark's signature at the bottom of the document, her eyes widened instantly. Mom, what does this mean? After all, it was her daughter. Mrs. Bellweather didn't want to hide it from her. Back then, when Julian got married and went abroad, you, a proud socialite, became so depressed. So I thought of finding someone to help you get through it. And Sincere Clark happened to come to repay a debt. So the two of them discussed it and quickly reached an agreement. As long as Sincere Clark stayed with Victoria Bellweather for 5 years and helped her recover from that relationship, his repayment of the favor would be complete. To be honest, Sincere Clark had done well over the past 5 years, but he also constantly reminded himself of the agreement, which is why he always referred to Mrs. Bellweather as Auntie Eleanor. Mrs. Bellweather also thought at first that if Julian Johnson never returned to the country, she would treat Sincere Clark as a genuine son-in-law. Who knew that just as the 5-year agreement expired, Julian Johnson returned, and her daughter had a car accident while trying to see him. While Mrs. Bellweather was still hesitating how to speak, Sincere Clark came to her first and proposed divorce and withdrawal. After listening to Mrs. Bellweather's explanation, Victoria Bellweather couldn't hear anything else. She tightly clutched the repayment agreement, her hands trembling incessantly, her mind blank. What had she just heard? So for the past 5 years, all of Sincere Clark's kindness towards her was merely because of repaying a debt? So Sincere Clark had never loved her. So, after Julian Johnson returned, he was so eager to divorce her. But the love she had seen in his eyes couldn't have been fake, could it? If he truly didn't love her, why would he jump into the sea for her? Why would he be so good to her for 5 years? She looked at the agreement before her with complex emotions. It clearly listed the things Sincere Clark had to do for her over the past 5 years. The further down she read, the gloomier her expression became. From being responsible for her life to personally handling all matters in the household. Every bit of kindness he showed her was entirely due to the agreement. There was no personal affection involved. Chapter 12. The last shred of fantasy in Victoria Bellweather's heart was extinguished by the detailed conditions on the agreement. Furious emotions surged into her eyes like a breaking flood, almost overwhelming her. With a ripping sound, the agreement turned to dust in her hands, scattering everywhere. In Mrs. Bellweather's eyes, her daughter had always been calm and composed. She had only lost control once because Julian Johnson got married and went abroad. This was the second time she was so angry because of someone. Mrs. Bellweather ended up swallowing the words she wanted to say. Victoria Bellweather took several deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. Since Sincere Clark had signed this agreement with her mother, then Mrs. Bellweather must know about his leaving as well. She looked up at her mother before her, a hint of hope in her eyes. "Mom, you must know where Sincere went, right?" Mrs. Bellweather looked at her for a long time. She should know. After all, she had arranged Sincere Clark's flight and everything for his study abroad. But Sincere Clark had asked Mrs. Bellweather not to reveal his whereabouts. So she looked at her daughter with difficulty. "I'm sorry, I can't tell you." And Mrs. Bellweather gave a wry smile. "Even if I told you, it wouldn't help." Sincere Clark might have thought this day would come. Perhaps he guessed that since she was Victoria Bellweather's mother, she would definitely tell her. So Sincere Clark hadn't gone to the country she had arranged for his study abroad at all. Victoria Bellweather's eyes immediately filled with disappointment. She had never known that Sincere Clark would leave so resolutely, just as he had unexpectedly entered her world. But aside from a trace of regret, Mrs. Bellweather had no other emotions. She tentatively asked, "Then you and Julian?" A jarring phone rang suddenly. The moment she answered, Charlotte Bellweather's anxious voice came from the other end. "Sister, hurry back, something happened to brother Julian." When Victoria Bellweather returned home, she saw several foreigners standing outside the mansion. The woman at the front had refined, detached features, looking coldly at Julian Johnson, who was covering his face and crying. Victoria Bellweather recognized Julian Johnson's ex-wife at a glance. She quickly walked over. Sharp-eyed Charlotte Bellweather saw her and quickly waved. "Sister, come here." Hearing the sound, several people looked towards her, especially Julian Johnson's ex-wife, who sized her up. The pressure in her eyes made Victoria Bellweather's heart inexplicably tremble. Victoria Bellweather walked up to Julian Johnson and looked at the person before her. "Miss Sterling, what brings you to the Bellweather family?" Beatrice Sterling looked at her and sneered. "Why, I'm here, Miss Bellweather. You know best, don't you? Julian and I were married for 5 years, and you kept harassing him. Speaking of which, we couldn't have gotten divorced without your help, could we?" Victoria Bellweather was perplexed. For those 5 years, she did go abroad once a week to secretly see Julian Johnson, but she had always been very careful to conceal it, and the gifts she brought were also common items. Beatrice Sterling looked at Victoria Bellweather as if she were an idiot. Although she and Julian Johnson had a flash marriage, she was genuinely trying to build a sincere relationship with him initially. It wasn't until she fully took control of the family enterprise and became busy with consolidating the family business that she began to neglect Julian Johnson. looking at the social media posts he made. She had thought about explaining things to him, but was then constantly interrupted by countless phone calls. It was during this time that small, American unobtainable gifts inexplicably started appearing around Julian Johnson. She checked the security cameras and only then found out that Victoria Bellweather had been secretly putting these gifts outside their door. A surge of anonymous anger burned in her chest. She threw all these gifts in front of Julian Johnson, leading to numerous arguments with him. Finally, Julian Johnson secretly divorced her and returned to the country. Beatrice Sterling looked at the woman before her. Miss Bellweather certainly has excellent breeding. You have a spouse, yet you can't forget someone else's spouse. These words made Victoria Bellweather's face instantly turn pale. I'm already divorced. Julian Johnson behind her sharply raised his head, a flash of surprise in his eyes. Chapter 13. From childhood to adulthood, he clearly knew Victoria Bellweather liked him, but he only saw her as a sister. On the night he learned from a friend that she was about to confess to him, he was preparing to take his girlfriend home to meet his parents. To avoid awkwardness, he decided to marry Beatrice Sterling and go abroad. Perhaps because the marriage was too rushed, Beatrice Sterling did love him sincerely at first. But later, as her business became increasingly busy, combined with the implicit provocations from other men outside and her delayed explanations, their marriage gradually developed cracks. The social media posts he shared were seen by Victoria Bellweather, which led to those gifts appearing outside the house. He knew Victoria Bellweather was also married, and was well aware of the trouble his actions would cause for both couples. So he had intended to quietly dispose of these gifts. But Beatrice Sterling caught him in the act the day he threw them away. The accumulated conflicts erupted at that moment. Later, he secretly divorced and returned to the country. His parents were far abroad and couldn't take care of him. Just as he was thinking of staying at his family's hotel, Victoria Bellweather, who somehow learned of his divorce, came to find him. He was timid by nature. The boldest thing he had ever done was secretly divorcing Beatrice Sterling. Facing Victoria Bellweather's advances, who had always liked him, he strictly refused, stating he had a place to stay. But she acted as if she hadn't heard him, forcefully taking him back to the Bellweather family residence. When he thought Sincere Clark didn't want him to stay there, he was relieved, thinking he could use it as an excuse to leave. Who knew Sincere Clark would actually agree? Later, his house was renovated, so he took the opportunity to secretly move out while Sincere Clark wasn't home. As they had been friends for many years, he didn't want to sever their friendship. However, each of his rejections in her eyes seemed to take on a different meaning. This undoubtedly troubled him. Upon hearing that Sincere Clark had divorced and left, his heart was filled with guilt. He shouldn't have returned to the country. Beatrice Sterling didn't even look at Victoria Bellweather and directly pulled Julian Johnson away from behind her. Victoria Bellweather instinctively lunged forward to pull him back but was blocked by the bodyguards Beatrice Sterling had brought. Julian, what happened before was my fault. I apologize to you. I promise these things won't happen again. Now, will you come home with me? As for the divorce agreement, I've applied to withdraw it. Julian Johnson was full of hesitation. Julian, don't agree to her. The panic in Victoria Bellweather's eyes was visible. She knew well the emotional pain Julian Johnson had suffered because of Beatrice Sterling during those years. If he went back, wouldn't he be repeating the same mistake? Charlotte Bellweather beside her also kept nodding. Yes, brother Julian, my sister is the best. Julian Johnson took a deep breath, looking at the hand Beatrice Sterling held tightly, looking up at Victoria Bellweather. Sister Victoria, thank you for taking care of me these past few days. With these words, Victoria Bellweather before him utterly broke down. Julian Johnson bit his lip. Since I was a child, my nature has been weak and easily bullied, unable to refuse. You were always there to help me. I'm very grateful to you. Now I have the courage to speak up and refuse, but because I'm afraid I always cry when I refuse, which in your eyes has taken on a different meaning. I am very sorry for the misunderstanding I caused. Sincere is a good man. I also owe him an apology. Victoria Bellweather, let's not see each other again in the future." He didn't know how this farce ended. The crowd dispersed, leaving only Victoria Bellweather alone in the mansion again. Looking at her daughter, who had become listless again, Mrs. Bellweather was both angry and heartbroken. Angry that she would become like this again and again because of heartbreak. Heartbroken that her health would suffer again, and this time there was no one like Sincere Clark to pull her out. The series of blows caused Victoria Bellweather to seem like a changed person. This gossip was also spread by netizens across the ocean. Chapter 14, Italy. When Sincere Clark walked out of the studio, his friend accompanying him was showing him gossip about Victoria Bellweather on his phone. Sincere, quick look, he glanced at the screen while holding his art supplies, then simply said, "Oh, that's your reaction?" His friend looked at him confused. Sincere Clark shrugged helplessly. "What other reaction do you want from me?" The social circle was small. His story was known to everyone. After all, Victoria Bellweather's story of having a car accident for love and then marrying someone else causing quite a stir back then. They also knew a little bit about the things Sincere Clark did. However, their reactions were miles apart from the reactions of the people around Victoria Bellweather. Victoria Bellweather didn't cherish such a good person. Instead, she just had to entangle herself with someone else's husband. Truly shameless. His friend dramatically spread his arms wide, his face indignant. "If I were you, I'd want to slap her twice, Sincere." Clark chuckled. From the moment he went abroad, he stopped caring about affairs back home. Late at night, as Sincere Clark finished his last painting, a jarring ringtone suddenly broke the silence. It was a call from another classmate who had returned home. As soon as he answered, his classmate's excited voice came through. "Sincere, Sincere, I'm telling you, Victoria Bellweather is crazy." He frowned. Only then did he learn that ever since he divorced Victoria Bellweather and went abroad, plus her white moonlight had returned to America with his ex-wife, Victoria Bellweather had become listless, staying home all day and drinking heavily. If it were before, he would have already prepared hangover soup for her. Now that he lacked his attentive care, she inexplicably started remembering his good qualities, coupled with others' remarks about how good he was to her. Her desire to find him grew stronger. Unfortunately, he hadn't gone to the country Mrs. Bellweather had arranged. She didn't even know where he was. To find him, she had neglected her company. She even settled all the scores with everyone who had hurt him back then. Even Charlotte Bellweather, who had seemed indispensable to him, had been forcefully sent to Australia by her. With this series of frantic actions, how could she not be crazy? Sincere Clark fiddled with the roses on the windowsill, casting down his eyes. From the day he agreed to repay the favor, he only saw Victoria Bellweather as a task, wanting only to finish repaying the favor and leave as soon as possible. On the day he went abroad, he initially planned to go to the country Mrs. Bellweather had arranged, but after thinking about it, he bought another ticket to Italy after landing. Since then, he had dedicated himself entirely to his work, no longer paying attention to Victoria Bellweather's affairs. Now, hearing about her, he could only think of one sentence: late affection is worthless. What's more, he didn't love her, so why would he care about her regrets? Sincere Clark habitually carried his painting board to the studio. As he left, he saw his friend waiting for him at the door. After taking the bread his friend warmly offered, Sincere Clark handed him the birthday gift he had prepared. Laughing and chatting, they headed to the studio, only to be told that the classes there were canceled today because a very famous artist was coming to give a lecture at the school. They both put away their painting boards and walked towards the school. The lecture hall was packed with people. Sincere Clark and his friend struggled to squeeze their way in, managing to grab the last two seats at the very back. As a knock echoed through the hall, the classroom quickly fell silent. When they saw who had arrived, the previously buzzing classroom instantly became quiet. No other reason than the lecturing artist was too handsome. In the art world, they had seen countless attractive people, but none were as handsome as the man standing in front. Only Sincere Clark, upon seeing the person clearly, suddenly held his breath. Because he knew this person. Long time no see, Sincere. Chapter 15. The person before him smiled at him, making his eyes well up. Frederick Davis was a childhood friend who grew up with Sincere Clark in the orphanage. He and Catherine Davis were a few years older than him, so both protected him together. However, fate was different. He and Catherine Davis were successively adopted by loving families. Only he remained in the welfare home and was eventually sponsored by the Bellweather family. Looking at the slender boy before him, Frederick Davis's eyes were filled with heartache. Under his and Catherine Davis's care back then, Sincere Clark was also a happy little boy. But fate played tricks. He and Catherine Davis were successively adopted. At that time, they were all young and didn't have contact information, so the three lost touch. Over the years, he had been looking for the other two, and eventually only found Catherine Davis. It wasn't until later that he saw a piece of news about Victoria Bellweather's marriage on the Bellweather family's official website. Only then did he learn that Sincere Clark had married Victoria Bellweather. He also knew about the things Victoria Bellweather did, and felt increasingly sorry for him. A originally lively and cheerful person had been tormented by this marriage, covered in scars. Learning that he was coming to Italy for further study, he and Catherine Davis discussed it and moved to Rome. They talked for a while, and Sincere Clark learned that he and Catherine Davis were married, and had also moved to Rome to see him sooner. This time, he could no longer hold back his tears, wanting to release the grievances of these past years. After having dinner with Catherine Davis that evening, the tears he had controlled earlier flowed again. The three talked for a long time. Catherine Davis placed the dishes he liked to eat in front of him and asked with concern, "Sincere, do you have any plans for the future?" Sincere Clark finished the last piece of steak on his plate and shook his head. "Not yet. Right now I'm thinking about graduating first, then holding my own art exhibition or finding a job I like. As for returning to the country," a hint of confusion flashed in his eyes. Return to the country? Of course he would have to go back to see Matron Agnes. After all, on the day he said goodbye to Matron Agnes, he had secretly stuffed a sum of money into his bag. But returning to the country also meant meeting Victoria Bellweather again. Remembering her frantic actions, his brows furrowed slightly. The couple exchanged glances and quickly changed the subject. "Let's eat first. We'll think about the future later. We'll all support you." In the blink of an eye, another late autumn arrived, and Sincere Clark had his graduation ceremony. Looking at the scene before him, Sincere Clark was filled with emotion. The graduation ceremony, delayed by 5 years, had finally arrived. Sincere happy graduation. Sincere happy graduation. His friends presented him with bouquets and congratulations, making his eyes turn red again. During their last meal together, Sincere Clark let loose and drank a few glasses of wine. The bitter wine slid down his throat, and a wave of sourness surged in his heart. Thinking about how difficult it would be for them to see each other in the future, they laughed and cried together, staying up late. A week later, Sincere Clark packed his luggage, bid farewell to his friends in Italy, and returned home with Frederick Davis and Catherine Davis. It wasn't a permanent return, just temporary. One reason was to visit Matron Agnes, and the other was at the request of his friend to collaborate on an art exhibition. Seeing Matron Agnes again after 2 years, Sincere Clark's eyes reddened once more. The matron held his hand, hearing that he had completed his studies and achieved his dream. Her eyes filled with warmth and satisfaction. As they chatted, the matron suddenly spoke. "Oh, by the way, not long after you went abroad, Victoria Bellweather came to the welfare home looking for me to ask about your whereabouts." Chapter 16. After not hearing the name Victoria Bellweather for a long time, Sincere Clark felt a moment of absent-mindedness. The matron continued speaking beside him. "But looking at her, I knew she wasn't good to you, so I didn't tell her anything." After having dinner with the matron, he returned to the Davis family mansion. Because it was a short stay in the country, Frederick Davis and Catherine Davis took him directly back to their home. Seeing him return, Catherine welcomed him, showing both concern and bringing him to the dining room for soup. After talking about the art exhibition for the following week for a while, Sincere Clark finally returned to his room to rest. Bellweather Building. Victoria Bellweather stared at the photo on the desk for a long time, lost in thought. 2 years. A full 2 years. She had mobilized all the resources of the Bellweather family, but still hadn't found Sincere Clark's whereabouts. Looking at the youthful person in the photo, a bitter smile played on her lips. This was their wedding photo, the only photo they had together in 5 years of marriage. People always tend to cherish things only after they've lost them. She understood that saying now. When Sincere Clark first left, she thought her strong reaction was just due to being accustomed to his care, which made her so uncomfortable with his absence. It wasn't until she saw the repayment agreement he had signed with Mrs. Bellweather, and the subsequent events, that she realized her dependency on him had long turned into affection. It was just that Julian Johnson's presence before had made her overlook this feeling. Now, by the time she acknowledged this affection, he had long since left her world. There was a knock on the office door from outside, and moments later, her assistant walked in. "Miss Bellweather, you're invited to visit the new artist art exhibition in the city center tomorrow." It was only after the divorce that Victoria Bellweather realized how little she knew about Sincere Clark. When Sincere Clark returned from sketching that time, she thought he had suddenly developed an interest in painting. Later, she learned that he had been studying art since childhood. If he hadn't given up studying abroad to repay a debt, he would have already become a rising star in this industry. Perhaps to understand him better, or perhaps to feel closer to him, she would attend every art exhibition held in the city. On the other side, his classmate had already sent Sincere Clark the list of media and entrepreneurs invited to this art exhibition so he could be prepared. Upon seeing Victoria Bellweather's name on the list, Sincere Clark froze for a moment. Seeing his reaction, his classmate quickly said, "If you don't want to see her, you don't have to come out for interviews and such." He smiled and shook his head. "It's okay." From the first day he returned to the country, he knew they would meet someday. You could avoid the first day of the month, but not the 15th. Besides, what was there for him to be afraid of? He had already paid back everything he owed her family. They were strangers now. On the day of the art exhibition, an endless stream of visitors followed the signs into the gallery. Victoria Bellweather walked among them. Over the past few years, she had visited many art exhibitions and had gained a certain understanding of the paintings on the walls. Every painting was beautiful until this one appeared. There were no unnecessary lines, only mountains and scenery. The nameplate next to it displayed the painting's title. Freedom. Inevitably, she thought of Sincere Clark. For 5 years of marriage, Sincere Clark had revolved around her, waiting for her at home 24/7. He had lost himself, without a shred of freedom. Something so ordinary had become a luxury for him. Lost in thought, a familiar male voice entered her ears. She followed the sound and immediately saw the person she had longed for. For an instant, her world became eerily quiet, her consciousness filled only with the man before her. He stood tall and graceful, introducing his work to the person before him with a smile. Sincere Chapter 17. Sincere Clark frowned slightly. Before he could even turn around, he was embraced, and the cloyingly sweet perfume invaded his nostrils. Victoria Bellweather held him tightly, her body trembling. Sincere, you're finally back." Just as Sincere Clark was about to push her away, a figure acted faster than him, pulling the woman away. "Sincere, are you okay?" Sincere Clark shook his head. Frederick Davis looked at the woman before him, his eyes cold. "Victoria Bellweather, how dare you come to see Sincere?" Seeing her filled Frederick Davis with renewed anger, reminding him of the grievances Sincere Clark had suffered during those 5 years. Victoria Bellweather opened her mouth, wanting to explain. Sincere Clark stepped forward and stopped him. "Brother, let's talk somewhere else." He didn't want the art exhibition he and his friend had worked so hard to prepare to be ruined by her. Upstairs in the cafeteria, Frederick Davis stood before them and Catherine Davis, questioning Victoria Bellweather. "Sincere, and you are already divorced. Why are you still bothering him?" Victoria Bellweather looked at the cold face of the man behind Frederick Davis. Her heart felt tightly clenched, hurting so much she couldn't breathe. Sincere Clark had never faced her with such an expression before. The moment she saw Sincere Clark again, there were many things she wanted to ask him. But in the end, only one sentence came out. "Sincere, why did you divorce me?" Catherine Davis rolled her eyes. What a foolish question. Sincere Clark looked at her calmly. "The favor is repaid. Of course I must leave." From the moment she signed the divorce agreement, he knew that the fact he was repaying a debt would be revealed to her. "So, all the kindness you showed me these past 5 years was just because you were repaying a debt?" Victoria Bellweather clenched her trembling hands and spoke. "Yes." Sincere Clark was still so calm. As if remembering something, he continued. "From the moment Mrs. Bellweather asked me to sign the repayment agreement, our relationship was only about repaying a favor. I constantly reminded myself of this, which is why, after signing that, I immediately prepared a divorce agreement. Speaking of which, Victoria Bellweather was the first woman he had ever been with. He was getting married before he had even truly experienced society. Being simple-minded back then, he was afraid of being misled by the 5-year facade, so he prepared a divorce agreement early on. Whenever he felt himself about to develop feelings for her, he would take out the divorce agreement to remind himself of the relationship and the distance between them. Had he tried to fall in love with Victoria Bellweather? Perhaps he had. But just as nascent feelings were blooming, she abandoned him time after time for Julian Johnson. Any normal person would become weary, let alone someone like him who was merely repaying a debt. Not disliking her was good enough. 5 years, seemingly a long time, extending to the point where he thought this would be his life forever. Yet also short, just a moment, and he was completely free of her, having gone abroad. Emotionless yet realistic words followed one after another, and Victoria Bellweather's face grew paler and paler. "Victoria Bellweather, I have never, neither in the past, present, nor future, loved or will ever love you. Between us there was only the repayment of a debt." He didn't care what her reaction was. He just wanted to resolve this matter quickly, and then go back down to handle the art exhibition affairs. Victoria Bellweather wanted to step forward and stop him, but Frederick Davis kept blocking her way. She could only watch helplessly as Sincere Clark's figure disappeared behind the door. This art exhibition was not affected by the small incident and was successfully held in the end. To celebrate him, Frederick Davis and Catherine Davis specifically booked his favorite restaurant. But before the food arrived, a bouquet of vibrant roses was delivered. "Excuse me, who is Mr. Clark?" "These flowers are from Miss Bellweather, specifically to congratulate Mr. Clark on the successful art exhibition." Sincere Clark didn't even take them. He simply told the waiter to return them. "Please tell Miss Bellweather that I don't like red roses." Red roses were Julian Johnson's favorite. He only liked thorny roses. Chapter 18. The originally warm atmosphere suddenly grew tense. The waiter stood there with the roses in his hand, unsure whether to go in or out. Seeing that Sincere Clark remained silent for a long time, the waiter finally quietly left. But this didn't deter Victoria Bellweather. She continued to send a bouquet of roses to his studio every day. Every bouquet of roses was thrown into the trash before it even entered the studio. At another art exhibition, Victoria Bellweather specifically stopped him, wanting to ask Sincere Clark why he didn't accept her flowers. Sincere Clark looked at her for a long time, then suddenly let out a sarcastic laugh. They were married for 5 years, yet she knew nothing about him. "Because I don't like you. I don't like anything you give me either. Victoria Bellweather, why can't we have a clean break? I've divorced you, shouldn't you be the happiest one?" She took a deep breath. Her eyes seemed to hold crushed starlight. Her voice was shaky, and she instinctively reached out to grab his hand. No, Sincere, I wasn't happy about divorcing you. I had become used to you being in my life. No, it wasn't until after you left that I realized the person I truly liked was you. Julian Johnson. I felt that way about him only out of youthful, unfulfilled desire. Now he's also gone. Why can't we go back to how things were before? A flicker of distraction crossed Sincere Clark's eyes. Every day of the past felt like torture to him. He didn't want to go back to those days at all. He turned sideways, dodging her hand, his voice chilling. Victoria Bellweather, listen to what you just said. What you feel for me is just habit, like a housekeeper. It's just that other housekeepers wouldn't stake their life for you like I did. Do you truly believe you like me? Do you believe those words yourself? Victoria Bellweather's face also turned pale. Since entering the Bellweather family at 18, she had never experienced such a somber moment. Victoria Bellweather had always been proud and condescending. Her face now looking so distressed was simply because he wasn't indulging her words as before, but straight up exposed her innermost thoughts. He didn't look at her again and turned to leave. But just as he left the studio, he suddenly received a call from Mrs. Bellweather. Thinking of Mrs. Bellweather, Sincere Clark only felt grateful. After all, it was Mrs. Bellweather who gave him an opportunity to repay the favor. At that time, Sincere Clark had just started university and had very little money left after paying tuition. Sincere Clark also didn't want to owe the Bellweather family. Being able to repay the money the Bellweather family invested in him with 5 years of his life was undoubtedly the best method. For emotional and practical reasons, he had to visit Mrs. Bellweather. Frederick Davis looked at him worriedly. You and the Bellweather family have already cleared everything. There's no need to go back to the Bellweather house. What if they cause trouble for you again? After Frederick Davis was adopted, his adoptive parents also exposed him to many things about affluent families and taught him many principles. Repaying the favor wasn't limited to helping Victoria Bellweather recover from heartbreak. Yet Mrs. Bellweather specifically asked a young man to give up his future and studies to waste 5 years in a marriage. That was truly disgusting. Indeed, Frederick Davis was right. Mrs. Bellweather and Sincere Clark exchanged pleasantries for a while. Then she shifted the topic to Victoria Bellweather, subtly suggesting he give Victoria Bellweather another chance. Frederick Davis was actually correct. Victoria Bellweather's heartbreak was caused by herself and Julian Johnson, yet he, an innocent party, was forced to pull her out, losing his studies, his future, his freedom. It was even euphemistically called repaying a debt, forcing him to endure 5 years of hardship and expect him to feel grateful to the Bellweather family. Where in the world was such a good deal? Actually, he hadn't wanted to do it at first. If he could have completed university successfully and studied abroad, even if it was a year or two later than repaying the debt, he could have repaid the Bellweather family's sponsorship with interest. It was just that Mrs. Bellweather pampered her daughter too much. She couldn't bear for Victoria Bellweather to suffer even a little bit, so she was impatient to pull him into the situation. Her daughter's life shouldn't be ruined by this trivial matter, but whether his life was ruined or not, no one seemed to care at all. Chapter 19. Mrs. Bellweather looked at the handsome man before her heart filled with satisfaction and regret. Her satisfaction came from the fact that such a man would make an excellent son-in-law for the Bellweather family. Her regret stemmed from the time when Victoria Bellweather only had Julian Johnson in her heart, thus missing out on such a good son-in-law. However, now Victoria Bellweather had broken things off with Julian Johnson. If Sincere Clark could return and be their son-in-law again, it would also be good. After listening to Mrs. Bellweather, Sincere Clark said nothing. He simply placed the bank card he had already prepared in front of Mrs. Bellweather. The money in here is double the amount the Bellweather family sponsored me with back then. Without that repayment agreement, I would only have been delayed by a couple of years and could have repaid the Bellweather family sponsorship with interest. The Bellweather family had always been charitable and sponsored more than just him. The money was just regularly transferred to their bank accounts. In these past years, the Bellweather family hadn't sought out those they had sponsored, asking them to repay favors. Perhaps he was too naive, coincidentally presenting himself. Now he had realized it, but he didn't have the energy to dwell on it too much. After speaking, he didn't look at Mrs. Bellweather's reaction, picked up the bank card, and walked out. Mrs. Bellweather froze for a moment, a surge of anger inexplicably rising in her heart. But then, remembering the influence of the Davis and Catherine families behind Sincere Clark, she could only suppress her anger. As Sincere Clark left the Bellweather family residence, he collided directly with Victoria Bellweather, who was just returning. "Sincere, why are you here?" The woman's voice held a trace of surprise and delight. Sincere Clark scoffed. "Mrs. Bellweather wants me to waste my years and future staying by your side, just like she did 7 years ago." Victoria Bellweather's face instantly turned pale. She suddenly remembered the agreement she had seen 2 years ago. In that 5-year repayment period, Sincere Clark had to give up everything and stay by her side wholeheartedly. Any normal person would go crazy after a year or two, let alone having to stay for 5 whole years. Plus, considering her attitude towards him during those 5 years, his life during those years must have been incredibly difficult. Pain spread throughout her body. She clenched her hands, murmuring, "I'm sorry." Sincere Clark had already lost the patience to listen to her speak. He didn't even glance at her and walked right past her. Perhaps because of his words, Victoria Bellweather didn't come looking for him for the next few days. Sincere Clark was happy for the peace. Until this day, at the Davis family banquet, as Frederick Davis's brother, Sincere Clark was invited. Throughout the banquet, he was closely guarded by Catherine Davis, who was afraid of any mishap happening to him. "Sincere Clark, what are you doing here?" A piercing voice came from behind. Sincere Clark turned around to see Charlotte Bellweather charging straight towards him. After all, she was Mrs. Bellweather's daughter. Mrs. Bellweather couldn't bear to see her suffer in Australia, so she pleaded with Mr. Bellweather to bring her back. Looking at Sincere Clark before her, Charlotte Bellweather was filled with resentment. It was all Sincere Clark's fault. Sincere Clark got divorced, fine, but he also caused her sister to send her to Australia. A full 2 years passed before Mr. Bellweather brought her back. Behind Sincere Clark was the Champagne Tower. He instinctively wanted to dodge but missed a step. Sincere Catherine Davis quickly grabbed him and pulled him behind her. Charlotte Bellweather couldn't stop herself and crashed directly into the Champagne Tower. With a loud crash, the guests all turned to look, only to see Charlotte Bellweather tumbling into the Champagne Tower. Glass shattered everywhere, and she was covered in cuts and blood. Lottie Victoria Bellweather rushed over as soon as she heard the sound, wanting to lift her up. As soon as she touched her, Charlotte Bellweather cried out in pain. Catherine Davis examined Sincere Clark from head to toe, making sure he was all right, before turning to look at Charlotte Bellweather on the ground. The Bellweather family certainly has good breeding. Charging at Sincere without reason and banging into him. Has our Sincere provoked you or done anything to you? If I recall correctly, 2 years ago, wasn't it also Miss Bellweather and a group of people who pushed our Sincere into the Champagne Tower? Chapter 20. Hearing this, Victoria Bellweather's outstretched hand stopped in midair. She looked at Sincere Clark behind Catherine Davis with a complicated expression. Sincere Clark looked at the mess before him, his face full of mockery. Facing the pointing fingers of others, Charlotte Bellweather's face turned even redder. Ignoring everything else, she pointed at Sincere Clark and said, "It's all your fault. If it weren't for you, how would I have been sent to Australia with her family background?" She should have had a smooth life in Australia, but who knew Victoria Bellweather was determined to teach her a lesson and cut off her cards. She could only barely get by on the little money Mrs. Bellweather sent her each month. My fault? Who was it that looked down on me back then, mocking me? And who was it that sent you to Australia? You haven't even figured that out yourself and you're blaming me, Sincere Clark said coldly. Charlotte Bellweather, did you leave something behind in Australia? Hearing Sincere Clark imply she had no brains, Charlotte Bellweather was about to stand up and continue her rampage. Enough. Victoria Bellweather turned back to look at Charlotte Bellweather, a warning in her words. Haven't you had enough of Australia? Brother, you're saying that over Sincere Clark? What's so good about him? Jason translated text. He's as short as a dwarf, no physique, no presence, an orphan. And slapped. Sincere Clark suddenly stepped forward and slapped Charlotte Bellweather across the face. So what if I'm an orphan? At least I'm better than someone like you with no manners. He turned to look at Victoria Bellweather. Victoria Bellweather, control your family. Victoria Bellweather clenched her hand, her expression cold. She instructed her assistant beside her. Samuel Taylor, take Miss Charlotte to the hospital. Samuel Taylor didn't hesitate. He quickly stepped forward, covered Charlotte Bellweather's mouth, and dragged her away. Sincere, Victoria Bellweather said with a look of guilt. About today, I'm sorry, Miss Bellweather. Aren't you apologizing to the wrong person? Sincere Clark's tone was distant. He looked at Frederick Davis, who had been called over in a hurry by the steward. Today is the Davis family's banquet. Frederick Davis had already learned the general outline of what happened from the steward on his way here. He walked over and didn't even spare a glance at Victoria Bellweather, who had reacted and was now trying to apologize to him. He only looked at his wife and brother with concern. Not injured, are you? Seeing them shake their heads. Frederick Davis turned to look at Victoria Bellweather. About the incident today, my assistant will discuss compensation with Miss Bellweather. After speaking, he asked the steward nearby to take the two of them upstairs to rest. The banquet wasn't ruined by this minor interruption. It wasn't until late at night that Victoria Bellweather returned to the Bellweather family residence after discussing the compensation with the Davis family steward. Only then did she find the house brightly lit. The housekeeper saw her return and quickly stepped forward, saying anxiously, Miss Victoria, you should go persuade the master and Miss Charlotte. Miss Charlotte is still young, after all. Victoria Bellweather walked in through the main door as she listened. She immediately saw Charlotte Bellweather kneeling on the ground, her face marked with several slap prints, and on the sofa, on the other side, Mrs. Bellweather sobbed softly with her head down. Mr. Bellweather held a whip in his hand, looking furiously at Charlotte Bellweather. I see you've been spoiled rotten all these years. Who is Sincere Clark? What status does the Davis family have? How dare you provoke them? Most of the Bellweather family's business was abroad, so Mr. Bellweather often stayed abroad for work. All matters at home were taken care of by Mrs. Bellweather. It was only this year that Mr. Bellweather shifted his focus back to the country. After hearing from the steward about the things they had been doing all these years, Mr. Bellweather's vision kept dimming. Since you don't know the rules, you'll stay in Australia. I'll have someone keep your passport and things. You are not allowed to return to the country without my permission. Dad, Charlotte Bellweather, kneeling on the ground, shrieked. Victoria Bellweather beside her also quickly stepped forward to intercede for her. Dad, my sister is still young. Young what? She's over 20, and she still acts without thinking. You too, what's in your head besides romantic feelings? Mrs. Bellweather, seeing her children being scolded, couldn't help but defend them. Arthur. Mr. Bellweather heard Mrs. Bellweather's voice, and suddenly remembered he had forgotten about her too. And you, kind mother enabling spoiled children, upon hearing that his carefully raised daughter had been in car accidents twice for a man, and was always devastated. The anger that had finally subsided in his eyes reignited. They're both insensible, and you're following suit. Acting foolishly, your daughter is constantly heartbroken over a man, and you just let her run herself ragged. The Bellweather family doesn't lack other children. There was no need to destroy a young man's 5 years of youth and future. Your daughter is also like this. At her age, there's nothing she hasn't learned, yet she insists on learning those bad things, disrespecting her brother-in-law and even bullying her elder. What have you been teaching her all these years? Victoria Bellweather heard her mother and sister being scolded and felt increasingly unbearable. but a single look from Mr. Bellweather fixed her in place. "Both of you, get to the study. I'll deal with you later." Chapter 21. The empty living room was left with only Mr. Bellweather and Mrs. Bellweather. Mr. Bellweather looked at his second wife, his eyes filled with disappointment. Before going abroad, he knew he would be very busy, so he left the assistant and steward who had been with him to help handle domestic matters. But before he could even stay abroad for a month, the assistant and steward came to him for refuge. Upon asking, he learned that Mrs. Bellweather, newly in charge, had immediately fired them both and replaced them with her own people. Later, he heard abroad about Victoria Bellweather's 2 car accidents for her white moonlight and her abandonment of her husband. It was only then he realized that Victoria Bellweather had been unknowingly ruined by Mrs. Bellweather's indulgence. Their family had always been ruthless and decisive, never hindered by emotions, always prioritizing the family's interests. Even after suffering severe emotional pain, they could recover quickly on their own, instead of needing a man's 5-year help. And Charlotte Bellweather had been overbearing all these years, bullying classmates at school. Mrs. Bellweather had only given money to dismiss those who were bullied and had never uttered a harsh word to Charlotte Bellweather. This also led to Sincere Clark being bullied by the siblings after marrying into the family, and Mrs. Bellweather, as a parent, didn't intervene at all. "From now on, I'll stay in the country. Your health isn't good, so go to the manor for rest and recuperation." With one sentence, he effectively sentenced Mrs. Bellweather to a lifetime of isolation. She looked at the man before her, tears streaming down her face. "Do you hate me that much?" Mr. Bellweather looked at his wife. "If I truly hated you, the divorce agreement would have been in front of you the day I returned to the country." After saying this, he didn't look at Mrs. Bellweather's reaction and walked straight into the study. In the study, Victoria Bellweather and Charlotte Bellweather looked at their father before them, remaining silent. In the memory of the sisters, their father had always been abroad, rarely returning. They were closer to their mother. The atmosphere in the study was oppressive. The hour hand on the wall clock circled around and around. Mr. Bellweather finally spoke with a grim face. "Charlotte Bellweather, you'll stay in Australia from now on. I'll have someone keep your passport and things. You're not allowed to return to the country without my permission. As for you..." Mr. Bellweather looked up at his daughter before him, his eyes filled only with disappointment. "To chase after a man, look at the company's financial report. How does it look? From now on, the position of CEO will be held by your second uncle's son first. You start from the grassroots level. We'll talk about the CEO position when you are capable. Both of your cards will be frozen. My assistant will transfer USD 10,000 for living expenses into your accounts every month. Your shares will also be temporarily revoked. We'll reconsider when you two truly become sensible." With every sentence Mr. Bellweather uttered, Charlotte Bellweather's face grew paler. Victoria Bellweather beside her said nothing, but her hands clenched tightly at her sides. News of the change in the Bellweather Group's CEO quickly swept through the entire circle. Catherine Davis excitedly recounted everything to Sincere Clark while helping him pack his luggage. "You've only been back for less than a month, and you're going back to Italy already?" Sincere Clark placed the last folded piece of clothing into the suitcase. "I have to go." Originally, he had only come back to accompany his classmate in holding an art exhibition. After the exhibition was over, he was supposed to leave. However, family matters were complicated, so Frederick Davis and his wife had to stay in the country first and would go find him abroad after things were settled. Furthermore, if he didn't leave, he was bound to run into Victoria Bellweather. Now that she was no longer the CEO, she had more free time, and he truly didn't have the energy to get entangled with her further. Chapter 22. Sincere Clark closed the suitcase and placed it by the door. Catherine Davis quickly came over, staring at him with a curious expression. "Do you still remember Julian Johnson?" Sincere Clark's hand paused. Julian Johnson? He hadn't heard that name in a long time. He only remembered that Julian Johnson had gone back to America with his ex-wife at the time. He hadn't been bothered to inquire about what happened afterwards. Catherine Davis tapped her phone, opened the Entertainment News from America, and handed it to him. Julian Johnson is paralyzed. Sincere Clark's eyes widened suddenly. After reading the news, he learned that after Julian Johnson returned to the country with his ex-wife, his life hadn't been very good. Although his ex-wife protected Julian Johnson, the Sterling family was very dissatisfied with his behavior. Amidst their gossip and pointing fingers, Julian Johnson, distraught, fell down the stairs. Just then, Beatrice Sterling was also rumored to be involved with other men. Under various factors, the two had another argument. They didn't know what happened afterward. Catherine Davis put away her phone. Since the Davis and Sterling families had connections, after Julian Johnson learned that Sincere Clark was her brother, he asked her to convey his apology to Sincere Clark. Sincere Clark remained silent after hearing her words. Logically, he and Julian Johnson should have had no interaction whatsoever. When he married Victoria Bellweather, Julian Johnson was already married and abroad. If Victoria Bellweather hadn't constantly wavered between him and Julian Johnson, they wouldn't have reached this point. All things considered, it was Victoria Bellweather who was to blame. Knowing that Sincere Clark was returning to Italy and wouldn't be coming back again, his friends in the country came to see him off. In the private room, bottle after bottle of red wine was emptied. They still felt it wasn't enough and moved on to a club. He didn't follow them to the next venue, afraid that Catherine Davis might worry. After waving goodbye to his friends, he stood by the roadside, about to hail a taxi home, when a car horn sounded beside him. Sincere, get in. Upon seeing that the person in the car was Victoria Bellweather, he instinctively frowned and took a few steps back, but the other person acted as though she wouldn't leave if he didn't get in. Several cars were stopped behind hers, honking. Finally, Sincere Clark got into the back seat. Victoria Bellweather smiled and said nothing, starting the car and driving away. They didn't exchange a single word until the car stopped and the engine was turned off outside the Davis family residence. Just as he thanked her and prepared to get out, Victoria Bellweather in the front called out to him suddenly, "Sincere." Sincere Clark's hand on the car door handle froze for a moment. He looked at the woman before him in confusion. Sincere, if there hadn't been that repayment contract, and no Julian Johnson, would we still have ended up together? There was a hint of expectation in her voice. As if he had heard a joke, Sincere Clark laughed out loud and said, "Word by word. From the moment you couldn't forget Julian Johnson all these years, we were destined to have no future." From the rearview mirror, he clearly saw the indifference on the face of the woman in the back seat. Moreover, even without these things, we couldn't have been together. As a partner, you didn't understand me at all. You didn't know my dietary restrictions, you didn't have my phone number, and you never thought of giving me gifts. You never cared about me from beginning to end. You considered me dispensable. It's only because I tried my hardest to be good to you for these 5 years that you feel unaccustomed to my leaving. That's not true affection. What is true affection? It is unwavering devotion. It is sincerity exchanged for sincerity. It is remembering my every detail clearly. It is eliminating all unfavorable factors when you decide to grow old with me. It is firmly standing by my side, believing in me, defending me, listening to my explanations. And when misunderstandings arise between us, it is having the courage to communicate, and choosing me firmly and without hesitation when I am in trouble. Which of these things can you do? A miss trained meticulously since childhood only expected others to love her, never once thinking about how she should love others. If Victoria Bellweather had understood even a little, she wouldn't have gone abroad repeatedly to find her white moonlight while she was married, nor would she have secretly gone to comfort Julian Johnson repeatedly after he was married, causing unnecessary misunderstandings for him and his wife. Chapter 23. Sincere Clark didn't care about her reaction and continued speaking. Without this repayment, we wouldn't have met at all. I would have had my own life. Victoria Bellweather looked at him blankly, bitterness filling her throat. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but in the end she didn't. She just silently watched him open the door and get out. Just as Sincere Clark was about to enter the mansion, a bright high beam suddenly shone on his face. He instinctively raised his hand to shield his eyes. Then he heard a sharp screech of brakes and Victoria Bellweather's panicked cry. Sincere, the culprit of this car accident, was Charlotte Bellweather. At this moment she was consumed by resentment, thinking that all of this was Sincere Clark's doing. She didn't care about anything else. Breaking free from her bodyguard's restraint, she got into a car and drove towards him with the intention of hitting him. Who knew she would be pushed aside by Victoria Bellweather, who acted quickly. Aside from a few minor scrapes, he had no other injuries. Victoria Bellweather, on the other hand, was severely affected because Charlotte Bellweather kept pressing the accelerator. Victoria Bellweather not only suffered paralysis of both legs, but also remained in the ICU for over a month, before the Davis and Frederick families could take action. Upon hearing this news, Mr. Bellweather directly sent Charlotte Bellweather to prison. It was unclear when she would get out. During her stay in the hospital, Sincere Clark did go to visit Victoria Bellweather. After all, she was the one who saved him at the risk of her own life. Looking at the person covered in tubes, he let out a long sigh. His eyes were filled with complex emotions. The words he had spoken in the car that day finally got through to Victoria Bellweather, but for him, it was too little too late. Victoria Bellweather saved him only as a belated compensation. Sincere Clark looked at her for a long time before finally getting up to leave. Because of her car accident, his planned return to Italy had to be postponed. For the next few months, he remained at the Davis family residence, recovering from his minor injuries and shock. One morning, Sincere Clark heard that Victoria Bellweather had woken up. Upon learning that the person who hit her was Charlotte Bellweather, and that she was paralyzed in both legs, she showed no reaction, appearing unusually quiet instead. Until this day, Sincere Clark was packing his luggage again. He found a ring in a drawer. This was the ring he had found when he jumped into the sea back then. Later, Victoria Bellweather had used this ring to propose to him. Over the 7 years, the ring had rusted due to improper care, and the inlaid diamond had long fallen out. He rubbed the ring for a long time. Perhaps this ring was the best answer to the question Victoria Bellweather asked him in the car. In this 5-year marriage, he had been the one single-handedly giving, while she had been enjoying the fruits of his effort. Without both parties nurturing it carefully, their marriage would have long since rusted like this ring. So, regardless of external factors, without his consistent effort, their marriage would never have reached its conclusion. He put the ring back in the box and gave it to the steward to pass on to Victoria Bellweather. When Victoria Bellweather saw the ring, she stared blankly for a long time. In her memory, she had never given Sincere Clark any gifts. The only pinky ring had been given to Julian Johnson. A friend who came to visit her saw the ring and was suddenly surprised. "Isn't this the one we threw into the sea when we made a bet?" She stared at the ring in her hand and suddenly remembered that day as well. That day, for the sake of a bet, they threw the ring into the sea, promising that whoever's male companion could find it would get the piece of land in City North. Although it was a bet, they had thoughtfully tied the ring tightly to a fishing line and cast it into the sea with a fishing rod. Even so, no one dared to jump into the sea, except for Sincere Clark. He calmly asked the person who proposed the bet if it was real. After getting a clear answer and a signed land transfer agreement, he jumped into the sea without hesitation, watching the thin figure swallowed by the waves. The bones in her hands clutching the railing turned instantly white. Chapter 24. An unprecedented panic surged into her heart. For a moment she wanted to jump into the sea with him, but the next second he emerged from the sea, clutching the ring tightly in his hand. The moment she held him tightly in her arms after he was pulled out, she was filled with fear and a hint of an inexplicable emotion. Fear that he would disappear in that sea. Only now did she realize that emotion was affection, was love. It turned out she had fallen for him back when Sincere Clark jumped into the sea to find the ring. Belated regret washed over her. She covered her face and burst into tears. The steward didn't return to the Davis family residence until late at night. He came back with a car full of gifts. When Sincere Clark looked at these gifts in confusion, the steward quickly explained to him. He said that Victoria Bellweather had cried for a long time after seeing the wedding ring, and finally called someone to prepare a carload of gifts. She said they were compensation for him. Sincere Clark looked at the pile of gifts for a long time and eventually unpacked them one by one. It was then he realized that the gifts Victoria Bellweather had compensated him with covered his life from 1 to 18 years old, plus gifts for his birthdays, anniversaries, New Year, Valentine's Day, etc. during their 5 years of marriage. Every single item was something he liked, something that could have been handled with just a phone call she had delayed for a full 7 years. He put the last gift down and stood up to look at the steward. Sell all of them. Donate the money to the welfare home. The date of departure grew nearer. This separation, he didn't know when they would meet again, so Frederick Davis and Catherine Davis postponed all their work to spend time with him, touring the entire city, from the sunset by the sea to the highest point of the Ferris wheel, from candied hawthorns sold on the street to post-dinner desserts at high-end restaurants. This was the happiest time Sincere Clark had had in over 20 years. Catherine Davis put food into his bowl as she advised. Eat more. It'll be hard to find this taste when you're abroad. Although they had arranged for a chef and a housekeeper to go with Sincere Clark, replicating the exact flavor in a foreign country was impossible. Sincere Clark nodded obediently, eating every bite Catherine Davis served him. On the day of farewell at the airport, Sincere Clark saw Victoria Bellweather, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. Unsure of her purpose, Frederick Davis and Catherine Davis shielded him protectively behind them. Looking at the woman in the wheelchair, a flicker of pity crossed his eyes, but he acted as if he hadn't seen her, smiling slightly. Sincere, goodbye. Returning to Italy, Sincere Clark didn't go back to his old apartment, but moved into the mansion Frederick Davis and his wife had prepared for him. The two staff they brought quickly cleaned the house, and the chef began cooking meals for him. For the next week, aside from having dinner with friends he hadn't seen in a while, he focused on finding a venue for his art exhibition. Although busy, he was happy. Until this evening, he received a phone call. It wasn't from Frederick Davis nor Catherine Davis, it was from Matron Agnes. Matron Agnes said that Mrs. Bellweather had passed away. The matron wasn't aware of the complexities between him and the Bellweather family. She just felt that since Mrs. Bellweather had sponsored him, if he could, he should return to see Mrs. Bellweather off on her final journey. In the end, he did go back to the country for a visit. Seeing the Bellweather family residence draped in white mourning cloth, his heart also grew heavy. After all, she was someone who had sponsored him. It was all right to come and see. Entering the mourning hall, Sincere Clark saw many people whom the Bellweather family had sponsored. They nodded at him but exchanged no words. Over the phone, the matron had briefly told him about Mrs. Bellweather's cause of death. She had already been in poor health. After being sent by Mr. Bellweather to the manor for rest and recuperation, her health had weakened further. Charlotte Bellweather's imprisonment and Victoria Bellweather's paralysis had been kept well hidden. Until that day, Mrs. Bellweather, on a whim, wanted to chat with Charlotte Bellweather. In Mrs. Bellweather's memory, Charlotte Bellweather had only been sent to Australia, but when she dialed the number, no one answered for a long time. In a panic, she asked the housekeeper. The housekeeper stammered out the truth. How could someone in prison receive her call? Overwhelmed with emotion, Mrs. Bellweather had a heart attack and passed away on the spot. Chapter 25. Upon entering the mourning hall, Sincere Clark immediately saw the white-haired Mr. Bellweather and Victoria Bellweather, who sat in a wheelchair with a numb expression. Holding a chrysanthemum, he bowed 3 times before Mrs. Bellweather's portrait, placed the flower in front of the portrait, and stared blankly at it for a long time. His emotions regarding Mrs. Bellweather were complex. To speak of gratitude, Mrs. Bellweather had ruined 5 years of his youth. To speak of hatred, Mrs. Bellweather had also sponsored him, allowing him to continue his education. But the dead cannot be brought back to life. Everything of the past vanished with Mrs. Bellweather's death. Sincere Clark took one last look at Mrs. Bellweather's portrait before walking up to Mr. Bellweather and bowing slightly. "Mr. Bellweather, please accept my condolences." Mr. Bellweather nodded but said nothing. He then walked up to Victoria Bellweather, looked at her for a long time, and finally said softly, "My condolences." Victoria Bellweather gave a bitter smile and also said nothing. Since she was a direct relative of the deceased, Charlotte Bellweather, who was in prison, was also escorted out by the guards. After her time in prison, the arrogance on Charlotte Bellweather's face was gone. She was filled only with numbness. Even seeing him elicited no flicker of emotion from her. It wasn't until she saw Mrs. Bellweather's portrait that Charlotte Bellweather suddenly knelt on the ground and wailed. Nearby mourners turned away, unable to bear the sight. The day Mrs. Bellweather was buried, it rained lightly. Since Mrs. Bellweather had passed away, other prominent families also sent representatives to offer condolences. It was on this day that Frederick Davis and Catherine Davis discovered he had secretly returned. But they didn't say anything. He still explained himself to the two of them. Catherine Davis hugged him. "If you were threatened, we wouldn't have let her off either." At the cemetery, Catherine DeVase and Sincere Clark shared an umbrella, watching Mrs. Bellweather's coffin slowly lowered into the ground. Beside them, Charlotte Bellweather cried so hard she was on the verge of collapse, with two guards holding her back. After the burial, the mourners left one by one. He and Catherine Davis walked behind, talking about their plans. "Sincere." Victoria Bellweather suddenly called out to him from behind. Sincere Clark turned back to see her standing under the rain looking at him. "Could you walk with me for a bit?" Catherine Davis looked at him worriedly. If he even slightly frowned, Catherine Davis would immediately politely decline for him. Sincere Clark tightened his grip on the umbrella, then relaxed it. The rain came down harder. He walked beside Victoria Bellweather, holding the umbrella over her. The Bellweather family steward, who had rushed over, also held an umbrella for Victoria Bellweather while pushing her wheelchair towards the cemetery exit. "Sincere, I don't have a home anymore." The steward pushing the wheelchair stopped. Sincere Clark also stopped and looked at her. Her mother had passed away. Her sister was in prison. She herself was paralyzed, and her father, in his rush to cultivate a new heir, had rarely returned home, even leaving the funeral first. She opened her mouth wanting to say something, but found she had nothing to say. What could she say? Hadn't their relationship over the years been just like this? Perhaps realizing this, Victoria Bellweather also suddenly gave a bitter laugh. If only we could start over, how wonderful that would be. That way, she could love him wholeheartedly and protect him. They wouldn't have ended up like this, and she wouldn't be alone in old age. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as a second-chance drug in the world. Victoria Bellweather. The sound of the rain muffled the outside noise. For the first time, she heard Sincere Clark's words so clearly. Life has no do-overs, we can only move forward. Whether it was her or himself, they could only keep moving forward. There would be no second chance between them. This was the 3rd year since they got divorced. Finally, they could talk like this for the first time calmly. Let's just have a clean break. When they first reunited, he had said the same thing to her. At that time, all she could think about was how to get him back. She hadn't understood the farewell in his words at all. The rain suddenly stopped. He also closed his umbrella and walked towards the main gate. From now on, let's not meet again. His retreating figure gradually faded from her sight. Okay. Goodbye, Sincere Clark.